the director of the Museum of Military Medicine.
Emma?
Hi, I'm Emma Cannings. I have recently been the COO of Bookmark Reading Charity. I am currently painting various bits of furniture in my house whilst looking for whatever the next thing is I'm going to do.
Lovely. James?
Hi, I'm James Byron. I'm Director of Marketing and Engagement at Dorothy House Hospice in South West England. Fab.
Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Drinkwater, a Senior Manager at Deloitte Digital, where I work along on a number of sort of government public sector projects, currently working on the Government Test and Trace programme.
Chris? Nice to see you, Chris. Sorry, you're taking a swig.
I thought it was going to happen if I would take a swig of tea. I'm Chris Reed, Director of Volunteer Mobilisation at British Red Cross, and feel very bad for not having been here for quite some time. And equally bad, I'm going to need to dash off at 11, unfortunately, for a vaccinations meeting. But nice to see everybody.
Great to see you too.
Thanks, Chris. Jo?
Good morning. I'm Jo Blake, Development Manager at Human Animal Trust.
Nice to see you, Jo. Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Bradshaw. I'm the Chief Exec of Charity Finance Group.
Thanks, Karen. Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Harrison. I'm the Director of Marketing and Engagement at Compassion UK.
Morning, Nick. Sophie?
Hey everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Data and Technology at Homestart UK.
Fab. And Kate, last but not least.
Oh, hi everyone. Hi, I'm Kate van der Plank. I'm Head of Volunteering and Safeguarding at PDSA.
Fab. That just leaves Nova Crofters. So David?
Hi everyone, I'm David, Business Development Manager, Nova Croft.
Tracy?
Hello, I'm Tracy. I'm Marketing Assistant at Novacroft.
And Deborah Charles?
Morning, everybody. I'm CEO of Novacroft and founder and general arms around the world person.
Cool. Thanks, Deborah. So I'll just have a quick look at the agenda. So we're hoping to finish at midday. I know we always cram quite a lot into our couple of hours. So what we're going to do first, and we'll do this in a second, is use Slido. So to help us kind of gauge where everybody's at, we'll shortly ask everybody to give us one word as to how you're feeling today. I have enabled the profanity filter after I found that yesterday, so because I know a couple of you are like. Future insights. So next we're going to have, so Deborah will give us a quick glimpse at first what we can learn from the past, and then we'll have a look at the future and some current thinking around what recovery from the pandemic looks like and some scenarios around that. David's going to take us through some of our research into charity avatars and kind of what future recovery could look like for charities. And then there's some tips and hacks for resilience from Deborah. Then we'll have a short discussion where we'll all try and think of one small thing that we could do that could make a difference for our charities. So with that in mind, has everybody got access to Slido? And if you use, so there should be, we'll ask you for an event code, which is 9306.
So you'll need, sorry, Louise, if they haven't already, they need to download an app called Slido.
Yes, or you can use, or you can go to the desktop version. So Trace, I'm hoping you've popped her.
Yeah, you just need to go, you can use your web browser to go to Slido, which is sli.do.
Great.
And then I'll share the word cloud in a second. We've got awesome. We've got weary. I'm just going to try and work out how I results. Okay. So let's have a look. Don't know if you're going to be able to see that. It might be a little small, but we've got things like awesome, weary, creative. Creative, I like that one. Oops, see, look, there's a profanity filter. That's better. Hopeful, stretched, buzzing. So combo, sort of positive and challenging feelings.
I wonder when we're hopeful that a new normality is in sight, whether that makes us feel more fatigued because we feel like we might be coming to the end of the race post, if you like. I wonder if there's a correlation between the two. I don't have the answer to that.
Potentially, but we are also going to ask that question again at the end. So we'll see if our session has impacted that slightly. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Deborah. Deborah's going to talk about the future.
Okay, thank you very much. So the approach that taken to this really is what I do as a leader, and that is to look, in order to understand where we are today and what we can do, to look at the future and also to look at the past as well. So if you could go to the first slide, please, Louise, or the next slide. So kind of looking at history, the lovely quote in front of us, learning history is easy, learning its lessons seems almost impossibly difficult. And when the pandemic first hit, I looked into history and went back to the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, to see what really happened. Because when people first started talking about COVID-19, the sense of it was that it would just be a few weeks and everything will be fine. And looking at that in that period, it was quite clear that this was going to be longer than we thought. So it helped in terms of planning then. And now if you go to the next slide, please. So thank you. So now we're in a position where in the UK where vaccines are being rolled out and that's starting to go at pace, which is amazing. And later in a moment, I'll be talking about, in terms of future, about some near future in terms of what do we think. I've got 9 scenarios of how we might come out of the pandemic. But I want to kind of look at this in terms of 1930s and the Great Depression. What can we learn from that, and how did people react? And it's clear that it did initiate a new generation of politics. The retail sector changed and moved into central locations and changed how they sold their goods and provided cheaper goods, etc. Charities started soup kitchens because many people were without food and in significant poverty. We've seen things in Hurricane Katrina where as a result of the tragedy that took place, it improved engineering. And we can see in our time in this pandemic that the UK has been known always as an innovative country, and it was known for manufacturing, and we haven't really rang the bell enough for our innovation as a uniqueness in the UK. And the health sector has come forward and really pressed that brand home. And so in similar to in Hurricane Katrina, engineering really changed the understanding of modelling for disasters in that way, and structures to save disasters, to stop disasters. There's lots of things that we can learn from the past, and this is just to put in your mind about looking at the past when you're doing your planning. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So, bit of a busy slide, but bear with me. So some of you may have already seen this before. And what I'm doing is using McKinsey's information and some Gartner information as well. And I think so we could spend time looking at what does the future look like from a markets point of view. And we know that the health sector, the science there's tech companies, lots of changes there in the future. And where is the money coming from in the future? Before we really do that, I think it's now important to think about what next. How will we move forward in terms of the next year, 2 years, etc. So what you have on the left-hand side is a matrix, which is really about, on one axis, we've got the virus spread and public health response. And on the other axis, we have the knock-on effects in terms of economic and policy responses. And if you can see just under the small box, you can see a sliding scale. The darker the color, the higher the, thank you very much, the higher the average. So this is a survey that's been going on since last June to leaders around the globe. And what it's looking at is, what do leaders around the globe think is, what do they predict as the outcome? So this is the latest as of January. And what I've got in the large boxes is about the globe, and in the smaller box is the UK. But to explain it in more detail, on the left-hand side first. As on average, globally, leaders believe that we will be in the centre, which is that we'll, if you look at the explanation on the top right-hand side, is really that there'll be an effective response, health response, with localised reoccurrences of the virus. But in terms of growth, we should see growth happening and accelerating within the second half of 2021, and GDP rates rising to pre-COVID levels in Q4 21. And the adverse effects of COVID being mainly contained in mid-2021. These are all dependent on how, as leaders, how comfortable leaders feel at that time. And it's important to look at this because it affects how we respond. And if we look at the UK, in specifically in relation to this, what we're seeing is a lesser confidence in our ability at the moment to be able to have a swift return to economic growth. And we're currently in the B2 quadrant, section. And that's really saying that growth stagnates, GDP returning to pre-crisis levels in 14, not until Q4 23. This is structural damage due to business failures, personal bankruptcies, long-term unemployment, and the impact of the virus being controlled at that point. What I would say to this is that this is about what leaders think. I think that this will change as we see the vaccines rolled out more effectively. There is a cautiousness amongst leaders, understandably, in the UK, whatever sector that you're in. There's also a big thing in terms of the announcement of the budget next week, in March, sorry. From a budgetary point of view, the innovation, the growth or economic growth can be impacted by the rise in taxes. So the budget will be a big flag not just in those terms, in many terms, in terms of the trajectory that we take to come out of this pandemic. There is some more work that I could spend another hour. There's some more work really in terms of this is going to be all about how government in different countries now act to provide a energized, funded approach to growth. And that's continued support for organizations here in the charity sector and across many sectors to create growth and encourage us to go back. And when we think about, as humans, to go back, there is this, I'm pretty sure now, there's a pent-up demand to get out and do stuff. And so when we reflect on what we've just seen in the previous slide, that there will be some danger in government about how much do they open the gates in terms of energizing the markets, energizing people to get out and spend money whilst making sure that they're protecting. So it's a very fascinating subject, and there's a lot of talk now in terms of what governments will do. And I'm about to get more information on that, which I will provide a paper on or have another session to talk about shortly. So if we could move to the next slide now. So this is a slide again. So that those are leaders. This is looking at our country from a person point of view, a consumer, if you like. And this is from the Clearside Mood of the Nation report by BVA DBRC. And you can see that we're kind of all over the place in one sense. We've got a notion as at the end of January the 18th that 42% of people believe that we'll be somewhere nearing normal between Easter and children going back to school in September. But equally, we've got a lot of people thinking that it'll be 2022 or later. So as you'd expect, we are a bit all over the place in terms of what that looks like. And those sort of things in terms of the more people think it'll be over sooner, the bigger the impact on mental health, I think. So I think that's why potentially Boris Johnson has said that the soonest he would look at children going back to school is March the 8th. So I'll leave that there for now as sort of as a food for thought, and then go on to the next slide, please. So in this section here, David is going to start talking about the health check. So looking at the sector, it's quite clear if we go back in history that, you know, right back to the 10th oh my goodness me, get my right lips on here, the 10th century, when almshouses were created, and through the Black Plague, and then to the Great Depression, that charities played a huge part in the survival of humanity. Now it's even more important for charities to survive, but not just survive, that are there in the long term. Because when we look at the last slide, let's take, for instance, if we are able to get to a position where everything is right for us to have a very swift return to economic growth, then what happens as people start going back to work? What happens to all of the animals that have joined families during this pandemic? So there's some positives and there's some perils along the way that we need to look at. It's also saying about the pace in which we need to move. So if it's a swift turn to economic growth, we have to turn to, when we started the pandemic, we started it with a mind of triage. We have to get out of the buildings as fast as we can to protect lives and to protect livelihoods. Equally, if it's a faster economic rise, we now need to be ready to return or to move forward to is a better way of saying it, to a swift return to a swift way forward to meet the opportunities and to support the causes that you're doing with greater need than currently potentially. So with that in mind, we looked at so we're going to the health check now, which David's going to look at, and then we'll talk about some of the prescriptions for that. David.
Thanks, Deborah. If you can please go to the next slide, Louise. So for us at Novacroft, we're about solving big problems. And to solve big problems, it's important to understand what the problem is and what exactly we're dealing with. And I think it was last year, which some of you are already aware of, we looked at the charity space. And to help us understand where charities currently are, we developed the avatars. And the reason we did this is to enable us understand how charities can respond to the opportunities or the perils confronting the sector. But before I go further, I will talk very quickly for the benefit of those that have not seen this before about the avatars. So looking at the avatars, we have two pillars. The first one is about resilience. So how resilient is the organization? And the second one is about adaptability. And there are 4 quadrants there. So if I start with the top left quadrant, which is the green turtle, green turtles are slow animals. They're classified as endangered. And basically, green turtle charities or organizations are organizations that are not financially resilient. So they're more vulnerable. And they're also not very adaptable. Now, they're classified as endangered because when things happen, whether it's due to external factors or internal factors, the only place they can find themselves is moving towards or closer to extinction. If I come to the bottom left corner now, we'll look at the koala bears. The koala bears are very interesting animals because they've got strong limbs, they climb trees, they've got strong claws as well. And when they go on a tree, they would have enough food, they live off that tree. But what happens is that when the leaves on that tree is exhausted, then they have to come down and find another tree. But they've got poor eyesight, so they don't think long term. And koala bears are charities or organizations that are financially resilient, but not very adaptable. So for today, they're fine. But in terms of if anything changes, then it takes them a longer time to respond. Again, if I go to the top right quadrant, we'll see the cheetah. And the cheetah is the fastest animal on the planet. We all know about the cheetah, about how fast it is. But the thing about the cheetah is that the cheetah sprints, and the cheetah is not an endurance runner, so cannot go for the long run. And what you find is that a cheetah organization is an organization that is not financially resilient, but adaptable. So it's more nimble than a green turtle, but in terms of its resilience, it's not financially resilient. And then if I come to the bottom right quadrant, we'll see the golden eagle. The golden eagle is the fastest, is the largest, very nimble raptor, and it's got great vision, great stamina. These organizations are organizations that are both resilient as well as very adaptable. If you please go to the next slide, Louise. And I'll just talk about what the impact of this is for us as a sector. So looking at the sector, we did a study last year, and some of you have seen this, but what we found was that of the sample surveyed, 51.8% of those organizations are koala bears. I think the summary of what Deborah was saying earlier on is that this as a society, there's so much dependence on the charity sector. So if we look at the charity sector, if the charity sector is in a good place, then society benefits from it. If it's in a bad place, then the society suffers as a result as well. And what we find now is that with what's happened, there's so much uncertainty, as we've seen, and everyone's possibly cautiously hopeful or expecting that things get better. And whether it's better or worse, we've started to see some of the trends. But the key here is that how can the sector be better? How can the sector, what can we do? How can we take control? So for us at Novacroft, this is a tool that helps an organization to understand where they are and start having clarity on what they need to do. So it's not a death sentence to be, a green turtle organization, for example, but it's worse if you don't realize that's what you are or know what to do about it. So this is what we found. And we found that, just 5.9% of the sample were golden eagles. Again, this is quite alarming, but it's all about saying, what do we need to do? And Deborah will talk a bit more about what can you do in terms of surviving or in terms of thriving, irrespective of where you are. The research as well, we also looked at, if you please go to the next few slides, Louise. We also looked at avatars by income bands. So in terms of what income band is your charity, we can look at that and benchmark that. We also looked at avatars by subsectors as well. So I know that some of you already know what avatar you are. We've gone through private or individual conversations. Anyone that is interested in knowing what avatar organization or what avatar their organization is, feel free to get in touch and then we can share this with you as well. If you please move on, Louise, and I'll just hand you back to Deborah. You're on mute, Deborah.
I'm just trying to unmute you.
Thank you. I've lost my screen. So all I can see at the moment is a green light. So bear with me. I can't see slides, but I've got something over here that I can use. So for the benefit of everybody else, just sort of moving on to the next slide. Let me just have a look at what I've got. So, okay, so talked about the avatars, and the next kind of thing is looking at survival mode and thrive mode. And I'm not going to spend too much my time in this area and move more onto the thrive mode for the benefit of time, really. But obviously in survival mode, the first thing is how much cash do you have and how long will it last? And let's kind of assume that if you did nothing, then that, it's an important thing to think about, but nobody would want to do nothing. You're going to do something. And there's key things here, and I'd probably start at the right-hand side, which is about mindset. And it's very clear that as a leader, it's a brilliant time to be a leader, because we know in the future, when we look back, we can say we made that difference. We helped people, we helped save lives, and we helped save livelihoods, and that's a really important thing. So a mindset that is able, adaptable, flexible, creative, collaborative, agile is really important, and resilient as well. And I can't say strongly enough that it's all very well having that, but fatigue is a big thing. And one of the things that I think we're all in danger of is not being very kind to ourselves. And and I mentioned earlier about Arms Around the World. I've got 550 something team members, and I work really hard to support them and provide a safe place for people to talk. And we have mental health first aiders, and I'm seeing more and more people in the community struggling. And it is, we have to ensure that we're looking after ourselves. So kindness, it is thoughtful action. And in terms of ourselves, for us to all take a moment to actually breathe and to take, even if so it's just a smidge of fresh air, to get some fresh air and to do something different, to break the cycle. Otherwise, we are a little bit like, is it guinea pigs that go around a wheel, and we can't allow that to happen. So first of all, it's that. Obviously, reducing costs, stripping out things that are not necessary, subscriptions and various things like that, for instance. Increase efficiency, operational optimization. I'll talk a bit about that more in the next slide. Increasing income, we'll go into that in the next slide. And then whatever you're doing, it's about where are you going, what's the quickest route to get there, and are you on course? And what I do as a leader is really start at an end point and look at that endpoint and say, what does it look like? What is success? We call it vision hunting. What is success for us? What does it look like? What barriers have we overcome? What are we most proud of? Who have we worked with? How have we overcome, etc. And understanding that helps us work backwards from there to identify what we need to do to go forwards and the quickest route to go there. And of course, the quickest route, you have to ensure you're on course, and on course is very difficult in this environment because we can't all work at speed. As we just described the cheetah, David said, wonderful animal, looks amazing at speed, but can't do it for very long. And we're exactly the same. So we've got to be able to ensure that we are on course. And that is really having the kind of performance indicators that we were wanting to see. Now, traditionally, key performance indicators say, we are currently here and we want to get to there. And I've been looking really at this, and the problem with that is how daunting is that? When you're really trying hard to do a great job, somebody's telling you that you're currently here and you want to get there. And it's really to kind of wipe that off and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? If we want to ensure that we're supporting more of the people that we care about, then how do we operate optimally? If that's one question, for instance. And you might have a cluster of things that you might want to look at. You might want to look at how much cash you've got. You might want to look at how long it takes you to secure income. You might want to look at softer things about the well-being of your team, and bringing those together gives you a good view. And looking at that in some kind of benchmark and saying, okay, this is where we're here today. Any improvement is a step in the right direction. And that gives a much more positive approach than to say, you're here, we need to get there, move now. So, and then onto the next slide. So here I just wanted to talk a little bit more about building resilience in an organization. And it doesn't really matter what kind of organization you are. If essentially we're people and we want to belong, we want a purpose, and we want to make a difference. And we need to group together to be able to do that, because the sum is greater than the individual parts. In any organization, unless there's cash in the organization, however that comes, whether it's a budget provided in a government department or a charity or a commercial organization, etc., etc., it's got to have cash to be able to survive, and it needs to be sustainable for the long term to be able to be resilient. So I've categorized them for brevity into 4 areas: people first, growth, operational optimization, and financial resilience. Well, Louise, I hope you move to the next slide, by the way, because I'm still only looking at something locally.
Yes.
Phew. So in these 4 areas, if we look at people first, it's going to be really about helping people thrive. Now, I'm going to come to that in the next slide a little bit more. And in terms of growth, one of the things I think is really interesting is that I was actually speaking at an event last night, and one of the things that's really important is growth comes in many ways. Some of it is mergers. Some of it can be looking at startups. There are many startups, and this happens and has happened in every disaster throughout history. inventions, startup organizations, new ways of doing things with people who are not tarnished with old ways of doing things, if you like. It's worth looking out for those organizations, and whether it's a charitable organization or other, are there organizations that you can help fund or work together with a funder to max out some opportunity for you to be able to grow your income? And then I turn to uniqueness. So let's looking at the 9 scenarios for the outcome of how we recover economically from the pandemic. Then there's going to be potentially, like it or not, I suppose, a race to get the income from donors. And perhaps it's about looking at your uniqueness, excuse me. So if we look at the finding your competitive advantage, so looking at organizations that are similar, whether it's demographically or otherwise, who are they? And are they similar in terms of target market segment? Are they looking at the same things as you? Are they trying to solve the same things? What's the similarity? Are they very similar to yours or far away from yours? What degree of overlap is it in location? It could be location, I've said geography. It could be a number of different things that you can swap in there. So where are you with those? How much market share has that organization got in comparison to you? Is there a competitor competing currently? Do you anticipate them targeting your segment for the future? This is an interesting area, because there is a part of me that says I can't bear talking about competitors, because when you talk about competitors, there's a way of hooking up with people and having something that works for everybody. And one of the things about the future is about sharing, which I'll come to in a moment. But it's also truth to say that if your donors have got an amount of money to give, why would they give it to you and not to the other organization? So there is a way of looking at your uniqueness, and part of it is looking at, what do competitors do? What do others do around you? What do they do in other markets that you could actually say, actually, that is a uniqueness? What are the challenges and opportunities? What do donors need that you can fulfill that makes you unique, and things like that? And then we turn to operational optimization. And we talked about KPIs in the last slide. It is worth mentioning sort of in those that, you know, one thing is, how long does it take you to generate income? What's your sales pipeline look like? And what's your win rate? And then moving on to really something is about, so you can save money by removing cost from your budgets. You can increase your income. There is also another bit which is about the hidden costs. We call it failure demand, and that's where you're doing activities that are not generating you positive value. And it could be things like where you're putting an elastoplast to fix something rather than fixing the root cause. It could be activities that elongate income generation, and I look at it in terms of, you know, we have 12 months in a year, and what often happens is the income that you ought to get in 12 months takes 16 months to get, because of the amount of time it takes to do a particular activity. So if you can reduce the waste in those processes, get people to collaborate more effectively, remove duplication, for instance, that really helps optimize performance and increase growth and income in a particular time frame. And of course, you know, creating sustainable growth can be about sharing resources. So there's many things there, but I wanted to just focus a moment on sharing resources. And there is a paper, there's an organization called Recognition X, And it's a brilliant organisation that actually predicted quite a few of the challenges that we've had over the last decade. And they're now looking at the future, and we have kind of two ways to go: thrive or a very difficult future in the next 2 or 3 decades. And one of the things that really strikes me is near field as well as long term is sharing. And there is a need in the sector for expertise, but organisations can't always afford that expertise. And going forward as individuals, we know that 83% of the jobs that will exist in the fourth industrial revolution, as that approaches in 2030 and beyond, don't yet exist. And so we have to be ready for that. And I've just lost my train of thought. We have to be ready to homeschooling in the background. So we have to be ready for that. And it means as individuals, we will have multi-portfolio careers. And that's really brilliant because you learn more and you can help more organisations. So there's an opportunity to actually bring that forward. And wouldn't it be amazing if as a charity that we could share, if you share the expertise that you need and make it work for your budgets. Similarly, you know, as in my organisation, I think we have something like 45,000 square foot of office space over different sites. And quite frankly, as we move forward, whilst I will need space, do I need the same configuration of space? And what would it be like if I shared that space? And what I mean by that is those many hours in a day, what if I shared it with to enable more restaurants to be able to open in the evening, or we're able to provide a place for a charity to reside, so that we have a much more faster ability to grow because we're sharing. So those are the sort of things I wanted to talk to you about. And then the last thing I wanted to do is to go to some, I call them people hacks. So if you could go to the next slide, please, that would be brilliant. Okay.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, so we kind of all of that we've talked about, and you know, the most important thing of anything we're talking about is people. And I almost want to burst in song and say something like "people." I think it's a Barbra Streisand song, but I'll spare you that. When we look at people, we've asked people to triage, get off site. We need to protect lives. We've asked people to be on furlough, to be there with us, to feel that they belong, that they've got a sense of purpose and can make a difference. We've asked them to come back to the organisation. We've put them back on furlough. You know, this is around many sectors. And as humans, we are trying our best to remain engaged and to work effectively. As we now find ourselves coming out of the pandemic and the economic outlook, whether it's a swift return or whether it's a sort of a slightly elongated return, we need to get the team going. And here's a few things that you might want to be thinking about. So let's consider growth impact and just looking at creativity and innovation. It's a brilliant way to energize people and get people thinking about it. Actually, the opportunity when people have stepped out of working in the day-to-day is you get fresh ideas. So your team, whether it's your team, donors, volunteers, all stakeholders, whoever they are, collaborators, anybody, to get their ideas. And you can do that in many ways, whether it's improvements, ideas for anything, is to create competition, create an opportunity to meet the chief exec, to share your ideas, and to be championed through the organisation. And it creates opportunity and energises people. Innovation over lunch, a lunch session, whether it's virtually one day, you know, face to face, and find areas outside that are fresh air as we move forward. Just jump about a little bit here. Engagement, default to the positive. It's humans can be like moths to the flame, and it's, for some unknown reason, it appears easier to be negative about something and see something about running away from rather than toward. So negative is away from and toward, and positive is towards something amazing. So negative is starting with something that's bad, is painful. Start everything with a positive, because it helps people feel better. And right now, in Dr. Creosote, or Mr. Creosote's one wafer thin mint every time is just, in a positive way, is brilliant. In a negative way, is just one step too far. So start with the positives. Create a safe space to speak. I found that immensely beneficial within my team. And we have a place every week on a Tuesday, generally on a Tuesday, we have an in conversation with, and I get the whole team, invite the whole team to a meeting for an hour. We might give updates on things, talk about things, brilliant things that people have done, talk about stuff that's difficult without judgment, and just talk openly about things to be supportive. And that's really working well. I think, let me pick some more out. Ask your team to, so looking at being customer centric. Now, I'm kind of thought, customer, well, that's an interesting word, isn't it? Because in life, we're all customers in some shape or form. I might decide not to use that word at home, I might add, but we're all in one sense customers. And I did think that creating a 1 to 2 minute video of customers struggling to use a system or a process, or engaging in donating or being a volunteer, just pretend to be, what would it be like, and just do that. It's rough and ready, but it's interesting. Get them to do that as well. What's it like? Because you can learn so much from it, and all of this creates energy, which is what we want. There's another thing, put an empty chair in a meeting room, whether it's virtually or otherwise. You can create an empty chair. When you're talking about, if we're talking it from a point of view of donors, and you're talking about what they think, actually having an empty chair there helps you think about it in a different way. I'm going to kind of move over that. Actually on the, it's also a fun idea to think about your organisation. Pretend you're just starting up to do the same thing, and get people to, whether it's a drawing. So a great way of doing something is the 1 minute drawing or the 5 minute drawing. Just draw a picture of what would it be, what would our organisation look like, or do a cartoon sketch, anything to kind of give an idea of what it would look like. Moving over to the other side, and agility. We all know there are things in our organisation that we should really stop doing. And, whether that's, somebody always saying, it used to be like this, or we can't do that, or whatever the statements are, it is kind of try and get people to stop so that they can move to the positives. Projects that are not working, is there a kill switch to be had? And this is an interesting one, that the allow one fire drill. So I'm sure that like me, you have many time bandits in life, probably because you want to help people. And sometimes people will email you and expect you to be able to respond to them pronto, immediately, and a little bit more discipline in the organisation in terms of how that works is a good thing, because again, as I said before, you're only human, we're fragile, and we have to be kind to ourselves. We can't do everything all of the time, and setting expectations is a good thing. Get people to speak their mind, to be able to, the safe place is important, and for people to be able to express their own opinions. What you will find in organisations is if you ask for an opinion, the next person will say, absolutely agree with that person, and mirror in some way what they've said. So to kind of stop that and to encourage people to have their own opinions. So, and then the next one is sharing one thing. So talking to people that don't work in your team about ideas to break down barriers. So whether that's inside or outside your organisation, share things and talk about things to get opinions. I think, what else have I known? I think I've really covered most of those. The only last thing, excuse me, is the acid test in whatever you're doing is 3 things. What's the risk of doing it? What's the risk of not doing it? What measures would you need to know that it's working? And what's the minimum you need to be able to sleep at night? So I think that kind of covers it for me, and I wanted to kind of open the floor up really in terms of a discussion, and want to kind of leave it to you to decide where we should go with that really in terms of discussion, whether it's about your uniqueness, people hacks, anything that you like. Okay, so can I hand over to Louise while I try and get my Zoom back on track again? Okay. Oh, maybe we should do questions right now.
Yeah. So we were going to run a discussion. We're actually like 20 minutes ahead of time.
Yes. And it is winning in life, that is.
Which is amazing. So we were going to do a discussion on kind of, you know, based on what you've just heard in terms of you know, the people hack stuff and the sort of ways that we can build resilience. What's the one small thing that we could all do that makes a difference to our organisation? But as we're ahead of time, if anybody has any questions, you can, on what you've already seen, you can unmute or you can use the chat. Anybody got any thoughts on what you've just...
Do you mind if I throw in some information around the kind of health of the charity sector's bit that we're seeing? Because
yes, that's fantastic.
As part of the coalition of people across the infrastructure sector, we're seeing quite a lot of what's actually happening on the ground. And if that's useful to share. So the first thing that struck me is that your comment about learning from history, and we know from the previous recession that it took 10 years for the sector to get back its reserves to the position that was pre-crash, effectively. And during that period of time, we saw quite a lot of change in the ecosystem. So you saw a move from grants to contracts, you saw a move from donated income to traded income, and there was quite a lot of change in terms of the sort of ecosystem of the financing of the sector post the financial crash that we experienced. We also know from then that the impact financially on the sector was around sort of 12, 18 months after the initial economic shock. And if you then map that to the current position, what we're thinking is that you've got at the moment quite a lot of almost stasis. Kind of the main economic shock hasn't hit because you've got all of this pump priming going on with furlough and loans and various other bits and pieces. So if we anticipate that coming to an end at the end of April, you're probably looking at the financial impact on the sector being next April, kind of 12, 18 months from the end of April, rather than where we were anticipating it last March as being kind of midway through this year. So it's elongated the impact of the pandemic on the sector. We also know from history that the impact and the relationship between philanthropy and workforce. So you cited a lot of the stuff around war and the bubonic plague, etc., where you had a lot of philanthropists that were kind of incentivized to set up and impact the groups that they were working with, either for workforce or for wider kind of philanthropic reasons. Whereas I don't think we've necessarily got the same sort of philanthropic landscape now going into this crisis as we would have had, you know, back in the Victorian era or even earlier. So there is a sort of an interesting relationship around that. But you have seen this real surge of grant-making organisations, both bringing forward cash that they would have given over a longer period of time, or really relaxing the way in which they give the money, so that you have, you know, kind of less restrictions, more willingness to backfill lost income, willingness to remove or change programmatic restrictions, so that charities are able to use it to survive and deal with crisis pivoting, rather than using it for perhaps programs that they were given in the first place. And then the last thing I think I'll say in sort of kind of the way that we're currently seeing the sector is that you're starting to see, if you imagine water on a pane of glass, when the rain stops, you start to see it sort of forming its little bubbles. And I think we're seeing that across the sector. So you're seeing a whole load of smaller organisations who have either been able to avail themselves of money because they are responding to directly COVID need, and therefore have had an injection of cash in order to respond to that increased need, or who are able to draw on other resources that are not necessarily economic resources. So increased availability of volunteers through people being on furlough, you know, increased desire and mutual activity at community level that's really kind of given a boost to some of those activities, or who've been able to say, do you know what, we can just go dormant and weather the storm, because actually, you know, money is not the major thing. On the large end of the scale, and there's a really interesting, I think, tension between what you've got there in terms of the avatar application to the largest charities. What we're seeing is the largest charities have lost between 15 and 25% of their income on average, but the vast majority of them have already tackled that inherent loss, if you like, for not just this next year, but for the next 3 to 5 years. So they've cut headcount, they've liquidated assets, they've got rid of property or accommodation that they don't need. They've dropped some services, they've pivoted to online. So you've seen that real structural change taking place very rapidly, and therefore potentially the challenge for them is around how do you message that in your annual report if you're seeing an increase in your reserves and an increase in your financial position, which actually is just this kind of blip where you have brought forward all of your crisis management to give you a better run at the next 3 to 5 years, as you know it's going to be tough. So you're seeing the larger charities, they tend to be almost, I won't say that they're not suffering because it's a mixed picture, but almost like your golden eagle avatar, the species itself isn't going to be, you know, absolutely full of death, but you are going to see areas of the geographic or you know, topical areas that are more at risk as individual charities because of either their unpalatability towards government, or that they are seen as less attractive to donors. You've seen a spike, for example, in social health and healthcare related charities being able to attract income, like Captain Tom and people like that, being able to drive money into particular areas of the sector. So and then the last thing around that sort of economic piece, I don't know if you saw Martin Lewis's coming behind charities yesterday, his piece in The Guardian, but if you read any of the comments underneath it, there was this plethora of attack around CEO pay. So there is something about the perception issue that that is almost unique to charities, in the sense that we're not competing in an open market where a customer is going out to look for a particular item, a bed, a carpet, or whatever. We're dealing with a perception issue that has a much greater impact. When I don't know about you, but when I buy a car, I don't worry about how much the CEO is being paid. But in a charity context, you can very much have that negative impact. Look at what's happened to the National Trust over the policy and non-economic activities that they've undertaken for National Trust, putting their properties into the context of Black Lives Matter and the issues of colonialism and trying to explain that has resulted in a significant impact in terms of reputational questioning and potentially with an economic impact flowing from it. So I've hogged the mic too long, but I hope that was useful context from what we've seen.
Karen, that's absolutely fantastic, and you can do more of that. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Really fascinating as well.
We've had a question in the chat from James, who's talking about sort of budgeting for next year. Do you mean 2022? Looking at next year?
We work on tax years. So
oh, I see. Okay.
22. Yeah, and so some really interesting feedback from Tom that, yeah, so the question is, you know, should we create a separate budgeted innovation fund that all staff can apply to? It's something that we've been debating in the budgeting process, and Tom's feedback from having tried that is that what they encountered was needing staff time as well as the kind of financial resources in order to allow that innovation to thrive. But yeah, I just wondered if anyone else had experience of trying to kind of pump resources for innovation to wherever in the organization there was the desire to do it, and you know, whether people have made that work in a charity context.
So
just to clarify, I was talking, we tried it as a trustee, as a school trustee. So as a multi-academy trust, we put aside quite a big chunk of money as an innovation fund for teachers to try and come up with new ideas. And what we found was everyone was very enthusiastic about its existence, and not a single person over 2 years applied to it. And when we inquired as to why, ultimately the conclusion was it was extra to their job. Because, and that, I think that was I would say that was specific to a school context, because within the school context, we weren't able to create time in teachers' days to be able to utilize that innovation. Whereas I think in a charity context where you have less of the kind of systematized time pressures that you get within a school context, you're able to do something like create the Google 20%, and you can use some of the funds to almost pay for that time. So recognizing it's not just about funds to fund a project, but also perhaps covering staff time to give them a bit of freedom and headspace in order to think about.
That's great. Thanks, Tom.
So if you're talking about innovation, this book is just fantastic about innovation. I don't know if people have come across it yet.
Yes, MB.
But it's absolutely fantastic. By Elvin Turner, then the guy. Just so simple, so clear, so easy to read. Yeah. So book review, book recommendation.
Fantastic. Like that.
James, I was just going to say, at the Legion, we used to have an innovation team, which, well, it started off as an innovation fund, more in the fundraising area than anything. I don't know, I used to sit on the board for it. I think it did actually work quite well as far as getting ideas and generating them. But as a culture of the organisation, you've then got to be serious about, are you actually going to be able to implement it? So I think actually in that environment, there were a couple of fundraising initiatives that it was really quite good for. I was then seeking it for some of the more innovative things we wanted to do across our membership, at which point the governance of our charity and you know, the ability to actually move on some of these things. So there's that slight danger between creating that excitement, because some of those innovation boards were absolutely fantastic and it's great to see, and it's quite a motivational thing for a lot of people involved with it. But those people who weren't directly involved with it, it was just hard work, someone chucking them some great ideas and they're like, yeah, of course we'd love to be able to do that, like we've thought about that before, but we just haven't been able to. So I think some of it is just being really honest with the culture that you have in the organisation to be able to actually implement those innovations.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a key issue. So we've gone from a position of having a relatively well for our size resourced innovation team of maybe 7 headcount, but that's kind of been wound down because one of the issues was we were kind of getting siloed innovation. So fantastic projects that were kind of being brought to scale at speed, and then it was very hard to embed back into the organization as business as usual. So then we ended up having an innovation team running a separate strand of operations, which, yeah, and with no time to innovate because they had to keep doing the stuff they'd done before. And so we really want to kind of embed it. But yeah, you know, that cultural barrier of how do you get everyone kind of bought into that, and, you know, and as Tom says, kind of resourced in terms of time to do that, feels like it's a major challenge. It's interesting.
I think what I've seen is similar. We do various things in terms of going out to the team. Our latest one was Let's Thrive, and we had some amazing ideas, and some of them are going into operation. However, the challenge, I think has already been described, is somebody might have a great idea for an area of the organisation that thinks, actually, get off my territory. All is good here. We don't need that. Thanks very much. And I think probably what works better in the long term is getting people together to jointly look at a problem or an opportunity. So if there's something in the organisation that is a problem, get people to kind of put their hands up to say, you know, I'd like to kind of talk about it, so that you've got the right people buying into it who want to make it change, and there's a reason to make it change. And I think that gets better traction than the sort of scattergun approach, lots of ideas, because at the moment, if you're not careful, they end up being distraction, because if you don't treat them with interest, then what are you saying to that person? You've asked them for ideas, and then you can't give it the time of day, so it becomes counterproductive. That person feels disengaged. So going out and getting people to put their hands up saying, yeah, I'd like to be part of that, I think is possibly a better way to go.
Interesting stuff.
Charlotte?
Good morning. I really enjoyed what you had to say, Deborah, and I enjoyed Karen's response. It was like being at a really classy lecture. It was great.
Hey, Karen.
What I picked up on, Deborah, which I think really I want to underline, is your comment about any improvement is a step in the right direction. And I think what I'm recognising from chats with some of my direct reports and other colleagues is that when there is so much to do and the horizon is so immense and the timescales keep shifting, then people can be quite paralysed by the fear of it all.
Yeah.
And then actually not do anything, because
exactly.
Last year everybody from May onwards was busy writing the plans, only to have to rip those all up again in October. And so there are no guarantees in life. We hope that the vaccine is going to do the job for us and everybody's going to behave, and that there's not going to be some super duper duper variant that brings us into lockdown 18.5 or whatever it is. We need to have that belief that we are going to get through this, and it will change and it will end, and we will have that rebuilding. But going back to your point about any improvement is a step in the right direction. Last night I went into a absolute spiral of activity based on reading a little bit about, and it's old news, but it's around oh God, I've forgotten the name of the guy now, the sports coach for the England UK cycle team, and about the sort of aggregation, marginal aggregation, just make tiny little changes. And I got really excited because I've got a big project ahead, which is really about how to embed more diversity and inclusion into our volunteer recruitment programme. So the context is that we've had some really good news that will be announced today, and that is we've been reaccredited with our investing in volunteering, which is fantastic. But we don't want to rest on our laurels, because we also had some areas of activity and action, which was around about how inclusive is your organisation, what does it look like on the outside, and we realised that that volunteers are going to be at the heart of what we do when we get to the stage where we can bring people back, and we absolutely need to bring in more volunteers, and we want to be more attractive. But we had a look at our recruitment system, and it was a little bit daunting, And we thought there's so many things to be done here. So we've actually agreed late yesterday afternoon that we would break it down into pages of every single action that we take to find those small changes for those marginal gains, but actually to have a look at every single point. Where can we facilitate greater diversity and inclusion? What can we do? And I'm sure we will find other improvements. But the absolute joy, actually, the reassurance I found in I don't have to make big sweeping changes. I can just do this elephant-wise, bite by bite, and everybody can just stay calm. We can all, there's no, and actually then allowing that calmness and that belief that it's okay, we can do this in a very, very tiny way. And I think that is, and I know that's a small example of what I'm doing, and I apologise for hogging, but I think what's happening at the moment, what I'm seeing, is everybody's on the starter blocks, and they all think there's going to be some big bang, and they've all got to run and run and run. And having worked at home for months and months, you know, we end up in this horrible burnout scenario because the expectations on people coming back in, getting to know each other again. Do I shake hands? Are we wearing masks in the office? I now need to go home a bit earlier because I've got a dog. You know, it's so much happened, and there's so much happening. It's this weight of expectation on us all. And I think we have to sort of slow it down because nothing has to happen overnight. All that has to happen is everybody goes and gets their vaccinations and starts plans, but really that we need to embrace the gift of slow, because slow and measured will get us through, but running at it means we're going to hit the brick wall. Thank you for letting me have my little rant.
That was great, Charlotte. There's a book, isn't there? Is it Slow and Steady Wins the Race? There's a story, which is a really nice
it about a cuddly little creature and a
snail? Yeah.
I don't know about the book.
It's the snail and the hare, isn't it, or something like that? It's a lovely book. Karen.
I just wanted to build on what Charlotte said, actually, because we had, I don't know if you will, this will resonate with you, Professor Martin Elliott, who was the lead, I think, cardiothoracic paediatrician at Great Ormond Street Hospital. And what he did was took the lessons that he saw from the Formula One pit lane into the operating theatre, because he figured that if you had all these people able to do such phenomenal transformation to a car in such a short period of time, that there must be things about the way in which they were compartmentalising their approach that could be taken into the situation he was experiencing. And they recognised from their own data that the transfer from operating table to intensive care was when they lost most children, that was when they had most crises. And so by studying bringing in the Formula One team to talk about their pit lane experience, they were able to literally transform the way that the operating theatre was used in order to drive up success, and it absolutely worked. So I think what was Charlotte saying there, I think the ad from me is that we don't have to innovate by coming up with something entirely new. We can take something that has been working really well in a different context, like cycling, and put it into our own context to have transformative impact.
Agreed. That's called repeat and duplicate. That's a good type of R&D. Any other thoughts?
I'll just put this out there. So interestingly, you know, picking from what you said, I was listening to the Financial Times Daily podcast this morning, and they were talking about, I don't know if you've heard about the Reddit traders. So in America, you've got this big mutual fund organizations, and what they typically do is to determine what happens to an organization when it goes to the market. So they would bet on it and say, this organization is going to be great. And because they've done that, then they become successful. Now, during lockdown, some people got together on Reddit and said, why should we listen to these guys? And they started talking about organizations themselves, and they started influencing the price. So when the mutual fund says, let's bet against this organization, or start to bet against that organization, they start to support that organization. And they've started, you know, changing people's minds. But interestingly, they started playing games as well. So what they do sometimes is people start saying, and these are just regular people, they start saying, I'm going to buy that, I'm going to buy that, without buying it, and immediately the price starts to change. So the big guys in America now, the establishment, as it were, are screaming and say, these guys are not regulated. Why should they be allowed to do this? How come they're doing this? What's happening? But interestingly, it reminds me of crowdfunding when I was listening to that this morning. And it's the systemic shift in power from the establishment to the underdog. And it's interesting because I was listening to another podcast, and they were asking a question, and they said, what the Reddit traders are doing is exactly the same thing that the establishment has done for years. What's happened is that they've come together using a platform, a social media platform that's free, and they've sort of given themselves a voice. And they started to ask questions, which is similar to, if you look at the sector, which is, what exactly do the mutual funds, the big organizations, what do they exist for? So they exist because they support organizations, but ultimately they exist to make money. They're investing money in places where they can get yields or returns. And what they were saying as well is that if you look at that in today's world, technology has changed. But to do that, some regular people have gotten together and started doing what those guys are doing. So they want to make money for themselves, because now there are apps which you can use to trade. You don't need to go to the market to do it. You can trade from your phone, literally. And they've got a platform where they can share. And as they were speaking, it brings us back to what we're talking about earlier on about growth, about where the money would come from. And going back to reflect on, why do we exist and what are we trying to do? So listening to Charlotte talk about, we're trying to be more diverse. Actually, going back to how do we even get the volunteers in? Why do we get them in? That is the solution, or that's the start of that, incremental gain, to be able to say that over a period of time, we can get them to be more diverse. And I was just saying to myself that, I was just thinking as Charlotte was speaking that, again, we talked about looking at the past to get to the future, that there's so much happening around us, and we are like the boiling frog, whereby the temperature is changing, but we don't realize it because it's happening so slowly. And it's that coming out of the water to just breathe and see what's happening. And I like what you said, Karen, about getting inspiration from somewhere else to help you see things differently. But the reality is that if we look at the sector, there's so much in terms of, why do I support a charity? Why should I, basically? We know the charity is good, but it all depends on the connection. I support the charity that I connect with. What makes that connection is a personal thing. It doesn't mean another person would agree with that. But like Deborah was saying earlier on, I think that even having clarity about why we exist, what we're here to do, who else does that, what we can do, would actually be a bigger factor. I like what Karen said as well about the philanthropic landscape having changed. There's fewer money to go around now. There are different criteria to accessing that money. Why should it be you? And more importantly, one of the things I see in the trends, speaking to different people in different charities, is that we actually know a lot about what we do, but we know it because we are insiders. And to demonstrate that impact in a way that makes sense to the man on the streets there's a gap between that. So whilst you do these fantastic things, that's happened as a result of the things you've done, but to the man on the streets, he's got no clue. He doesn't understand. So the ability to communicate that as well is important. So I just wanted to throw that out in terms of what's occurring around us and how can we learn from that.
That's great. Thank you, David.
I think
where are we now?
Yeah, so I think we're just coming up to 25 past 11. So I think it's probably still worth us just having 15 minutes on the discussion. What's everybody think? So where we, based on everything that we've heard, loads of inspiring stuff, and we've captured kind of where you've shared specific things to read and stuff like that. We've captured all of that and we'll share it afterwards. But we talked about kind of one small thing that we could all do to make a difference to our organisation. and having a discussion on that. So if there was one thing, you know, when we look at some of the examples that Deborah shared earlier, for example, thinking about operational optimization, reducing waste, and thinking about recognizing your uniqueness in order to grow. If anybody wants to start the bidding on kind of something easy that you could implement, is it a different way of thinking, like James said about kind of innovation funds and things like that, something that's quite simple to implement?
I mean, one thing that I'm working on at the moment is effectively a new brand narrative for the organisation. And that's really about trying to take this, it being so important that we know who we are, and turn it into a story that will kind of resonate more clearly, you know, starting with the staff internally to both grow that shared sense of who we are, but really give it a bit of emotional connection. Because I think while people can kind of say, well, we're a hospice, we give palliative care, it's not clear that actually people can communicate the impact we have on the lives of our community in the way that we want them to. And that feels like it's really important in that shifting landscape. So yeah, hopefully that will be a, fingers crossed, relatively quick win.
That sounds great. I wonder what all your views are on when we talked about uniqueness and doing competitor analysis. Is that a swear word, or is it do you do it? What are your views on it?
I think that, I mean, I'll speak even though I'm currently unemployed, so I'm kind of just making up. No, I'll talk about, you know, from time at Bookmark, for example, there's always competitor analysis that goes on. You know, it would be foolish not to, but it's the result of the competitor analysis, and it kind of depends on the different areas within the charity sector. So, for example, with us, our competitor analysis, it was less focused on how do we beat them into the ground and be the almighty winners here, and more, right, what are they doing, what are we doing slightly differently? And actually it was done with a much more collaborative hat on, but having the awareness in the first place and going through that whole, whether it's a SWOT analysis, PESTLE, whatever, going through a process of understanding where you fit in. So for example, something like Bookmark, we knew that we were a very dynamic young organisation, able to adapt and be agile and all that side of things, in which case actually COVID worked out quite nicely for us because we were able to respond digitally very, very quickly, and the digital space was actually kind of where we were all along. Whereas some of our competitors, someone like, oh good, I always call them Bookworm, but they're actually Beanstalk. They were much more traditional based. They've been around for a lot longer, but their strength really was that they had a massive load of volunteers, but they were much more of a demographic that wanted to do face-to-face. So a lot of it was conversations between us and them to sort of go, well, okay, what are you using? There's a huge amount of collaboration on which platform to use. So for children's reading, Bramble really was the only solution because it had much less buttons than anyone else for any kids to be able to just switch things off. But you know, we sped up massive amounts of processes because we'd done the competitive analysis and then used it to speak to each other, to know each other. Kind of waffling a little bit now, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. That was certainly my experience. Using it for positive. I don't think, you know, you shouldn't think the word competitor as being a negative thing. You're in it together, and your own uniquenesses actually makes the whole thing stronger.
I agree. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think I would totally agree with Emma. And for us as the garden, it's interesting because our competitors come in all shapes and sizes. So on the one hand, we've got places like, because we're based in Chelsea, we've got Fulham Palace, who are very similar to us. We've got the Garden Museum, which is very similar to us. But then we've also found that in COVID, the way you think about competitors also is parks are a competitor. You know, free green spaces become a competitor, which is a weird thing to think about. But also then we've got those massive competitors, places like Kew, who, yes, they are competitors. They're directly in our sector. They call on exactly the same people, and in a time when there's less philanthropic money around from individuals, you're kind of fighting for that. But there is always that thing of being the big fish and the little fish. And when you're the little fish, you're not really, I can't compete with Q. There's no chance. They'd absolutely blow me out of the water. But it's that thing of finding, well, where are we distinct? So rather than looking at them and thinking, how are we going to beat you? It's how are we going to be different to you? How are we going to coexist? How are we going to be something that somebody looks at and goes, oh, you're not just an inferior version of. And I think that's really important in the charity sector, because there is a lot of replication, and it's hard for visitors or users or people who are donating sometimes to understand the difference between two charities that seem to be providing exactly the same service. And therefore, sometimes the competitor analysis, if it is a swear word, as you say, Deborah, maybe there's a way to kind of reframe that as it's more self-reflective than that. It's about understanding who you are in contrast. So not about competing, but coexisting, because there is space almost always for the two organizations to exist. And that's certainly how we have to think about it, is how are we different to our competitors? And then how do we talk and sell ourselves on those differences rather than saying, oh, we're better, come see us.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And would you say as well that maybe competitors are not in that sort of always just in that vertical market? So I might like going to a park, but I'm also the kind of person that wants to go to the garden centre or whatever. And so if I was doing something online, would the search optimization be looking at keywords? So if you were competing and you were looking at an organization that is generating significantly more income than you, would you think about looking at the kind of keywords searches in there which you can find to identify, be more Bob or whatever, just to be able to get on the same page as that organization?
It's really interesting. It's really interesting you mentioned that, particularly in keyword searches. So we exactly think being a visitor attraction, being a visitor attraction, it's a strange situation for us, because we're both in the charities kind of fundraising market. We're in the things to do in London market. We're also in the online shop market, and particularly the online gardening shop, which early kind of March, April, May in 2020 was the explosion market. And we had, I think, 2,500% increase in our online sales during that period of time, which is not sustained, but it was a big bump. But what's been interesting for me in doing that sort of competitor analysis, and particularly keyword bidding, is looking at what we're spending our Google grant on. So it was interesting. We have somebody who currently manages it for us, and we were being told how successful the spending on the Google grant was, because we were spending close to $8,000 a month, which, as people who manage it know, it's really difficult to actually spend the grant. But when we actually dug into the keywords, $7,500 of that was all on the keyword online gardening center, because it was that market was just not one that, in terms of search optimization, we could compete in, because it was at that stage such a growth market. So we were actually burning through and wasting all of this because we weren't getting any conversions from it either, because people were actually looking for B&Q. They were actually looking for other things. So it was interesting to kind of say, yes, if we could find the right strategy to tap into that online garden center crowd who might come and spend some money with us, there was definitely money there to be had. Yeah. But we had to be really careful to recognize that we aren't an online gardening center like B&Q's online shop is. And if we tried to compete in that market, we were just going to burn money and get nowhere. So it was a really, looking at the search engine elements and the optimization was a really interesting exercise for us to understand whether it was worth it for us to position ourselves in that space. And actually our conclusion in the end was it wasn't, that we were much better off not going down there. We're an online marketplace and much more down to gifts and garden lovers, gifting space where we could get much more utility out of the Google grant.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And actually, sort of oscillating to what you're saying and what Karen was saying, and I totally agree with. Look at how other people do things. Like F1 did the same in the rail sector, actually, Karen, as well, and made a massive difference to turnaround times, believe it or not. But I wonder, on the same kind of thing, can we look at other organizations around the world that have a similar input and output and learn from them, that do it really well? So in the context you just said, Tom, was about garden centres, and you worked out that wasn't where you wanted to be. But I think it's quite fascinating to look at different organisations. They're not necessarily charities either, to see actually we could learn from that. We could take some of that into our organisation. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's something we've been really trying to look at over this period, particularly around online fulfillment. So one of the things we were looking at was the publishing market, because and licensing, essentially, because we don't have the staff ultimately to run a large scale online fulfillment model. And running an on-site shop is a very different thing to running a very large online shop where you've got to do postage. And our one postie who comes at 3 p.m. every day in his little franking bag, suddenly having 15 massive parcels, blew his mind, and it didn't help us, and then we have bad experiences. So one of the things we've looked at is particularly kind of print on demand models, and the explosion of kind of particularly I'm forgetting the word, it's not courtesy publishing, vanity publishing, and those kind of models around where you can have stock in a conceptual sense only gets generated in situations where somebody's already parted with the money. So we've been looking at kind of print on demand for some of our artwork. We've been looking at print on demand for some books. And then that interestingly led us down a line of kind of affiliate models. So people who are just a front like Etsy, and saying, well, we don't actually need to have any stock on site. What we need to do is lend our brand, which has cachet and status, to artists and botanical people who sell other botanical things, and say to them, we'll take a cut, because a cut's better than nothing. So if we take 10% of all affiliate sales, but we list them on our online shop, we can generate income without any of the chaos of trying to fulfill that, which they're quite pleased with, because we have quite a big reach and a good status. And I'm very pleased with as the commercial director, because I don't have to put anything in a stock room. And so we're actually in the process of completely redoing our website. And when we relaunch our online shop, we'll be launching it as a very minimal physical product offer, print on demand and affiliate model, so that we're trying to generate the income by passing you on to a seller.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Tom. Thank you very much. Karen.
I love what you just said, Tom. I thought that was fantastic. And it made me think of a story that my chairman talked about when he was the CEO of TransAid, because there's also an element of potentially using what is going on in a different space as leverage and piggybacking on it. So he looked at the way that logistics were working in the countries that he was trying to deliver aid and medical supplies around, and recognised that people like Coca-Cola had already kind of logistical networks set up that they could then tap into in order to almost piggyback on them to get what they needed to where they needed to do it, rather than trying to set up their own logistical framework. And so therefore, I think it's not just necessarily about competing with people that are operating in the same space as us, but looking at models that are potentially leverageable, if that's even a word, for our own context, where we can therefore grow our impact and reduce our costs by piggybacking and collaborating and partnering with not the usual suspects.
That's brilliant, isn't it? That's Jason.
Hang on. Oh no, I'm not muted after all. Sorry, I thought I was. Sorry, sort of quite inspired by what you were saying about uniqueness, and also sort of thinking about how we can apply that to the innovation side. So rather like with what Thomas and Karen was just talking about, you're sort of rethinking actually how digital can work for us. We've got some fantastic archives about innovation past. And you know, the traditional idea of a museum is going to a building and looking at things, whereas actually what we're looking at now is actually how can we widen out the impact of our collections nationally or even internationally, and actually make that past innovation you know, an inspiration for future work, particularly around medicine, and actually, as Thomas was saying, you know, actually sort of turn that into a revenue source at that same time. So rather like Thomas, we're now looking at how we can develop a new website that will have those sort of, you know, sort of behind paywall aspects to get a lot of that digitized material there that people can access and be inspired by for future work.
I think that would be amazing. You must have such a massive repository of amazing information that there's a massive thirst, isn't there, for information that can help us remove the uncertainty. And
I hope so. I mean, we've got an archive, one that we're sort of getting in at the moment, of about 24 million patient records, stretching from about 1920 through to about 1970. So it has things in it like the, you know, the early application of things like penicillin, and you've actually got the, I mean, it'll be anonymized, obviously, but looking at the impact of that on patients, and so you can actually sort of look through and sort of see how that would then work, and then, you know, particularly thinking about development now of modern medicines, then how that could, you know, how that past experience then can be applied to the present and the future.
wow, well, that's a knee rubbing thing, that is, Jason. I'd really like to.
It's a big digitization job, I can tell you that.
So proper few days out, that is. I'd love that.
One or two.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts, anybody? Kate?
Yeah, it's yeah, moving on to one of the different topics on your sort of slide, but the thing that I'm working on, it's around the sort of people area, but it's around really working with our leaders and looking at trying to change the leadership narrative in the organisation. And I think that's maybe something we underestimate, the help and support our leaders need to lead in a very different way. Probably the thing I hear most in our organisation, more than you're still on mute, is, you know, we need to hit the ground running, and that, on the one hand, we've got all the stuff going on. We've done loads of stuff around mental health for our, you know, volunteers, for our staff, you know, all this, it's okay to not be okay. But that jars with then this business narrative around that pace, and, you know, we need to hit the ground running, and, you know, and it's putting pressure on. So it's, how can we still lead in a way that, because our leaders always sort of default to that, you know, being the one that G's people up, keeps everyone going, keeps up, come on team, you know, all this sort of false positive. And our leaders actually need to learn, and we need to support them. How can you lead in a way that's still effective, but is about slowing down that pace, but without breaking all of your rules and boundaries? You can't suddenly send everyone home for a week, or, you know, have a duvet day. You know, and those are real challenges. So that's the bit I'm working with our senior managers, is how can we do that in an effective way, but, you know, and recognise some of those sort of dichotomies, really.
I think that's a really interesting topic, because I think sometimes leaders think that they have to be seen to be acting in a certain way, and that can lead to them being a big gap between themselves and their teams and people around them. And I think some of that is fear of being seen for being themselves, because if they let people in, then will they be able to lead? And it's a very sort of traditional approach to leadership, I think, and it is probably something where individuals as leaders need some support from somebody off-site that can help them understand that it's actually it's a good thing to do. It's actually positive to be able to reveal more of yourself, to say, you know, we're all in this together, and talk more authentically, because you're still leading, you're still working with your team, but to be authentic. And I would suggest, I have a guy that I use with some of my team to help him that in different ways, but he can definitely help in that area, is to help them understand it's okay and how to engage. See, even we wouldn't really use the term, we would say talk. You know, it's talk with people, just talk, and allow people to talk without judging them. So, oh, Karen, bye. So yeah, I think there's I can give you his details actually, Kate, if that would help. Fantastic.
Jo has her hand up.
Sorry, yeah, just wanted to add really with sort of talking about pace and everything else. It's been something that we've been talking about a lot within our organisation. We're very small, there are literally 3 of us, so keeping things fairly informal and relaxed is a little bit easier for us than within some organisations that I've worked in. But it's interesting, and it's quite easy to put yourself under pressure. You kind of, you know, you've pivoted, you've set your plans, and you're moving forward. And obviously managing how we're all feeling. And I think, I don't know about anyone else, but I've underestimated how much this has all impacted me and my ability to be really productive and get stuff done. And it's something that I find really frustrating. And one of my colleagues talking yesterday, just saying that this, I just, you know, how are we going to do all this? We've got to do that, and then we've got to get this in place. And actually what we talked through was, well, okay, if this isn't working, let's break it down. What can we do? How do we make that progress? And it comes back to the incremental progress. How do we move forward? And that any progress is progress, but you know, you're having to just keep pivoting and just seeing how is the team performing? How is everyone feeling? What can we achieve? And let's focus on what we can do well. And if it takes us longer to do things, longer to achieve things, well, we've still achieved them, and that's good.
Yeah.
And I think it's managing our own internal dialogues, but also having that openly. And as you say, it's that safe space to actually talk and say, do you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not handling this very well. Can we talk this through? How do we change how we approach this?
I think you've brought up a really good subject, and on the same point, I'm looking now and thinking, you know, it's actually better to take, whether it's a couple of days out, stop, down tools if you like, and go and do something different, is better than trying to push on when you're exhausted. If your brain's not functioning properly because you've been doing it and not doing anything else, then it's better to stop. And I think, you know, taking that message on myself, but also with my team as well. And, you know, there is this, you're right, this kind of feel of pace that we need to move, because if we don't keep moving forward, then what's going to happen? And I think that it, you know, back to the hare and the tortoise, it's a tortoise, or the hare and the snow, whatever it is, hare and tortoise, that's the one, is, you know, it is sometimes you're right, you've got to be able to do that. But we know I've sometimes dreadful thought, there's 2 things. The easiest one is to think, if I was on holiday right now, I couldn't do it, and the wheels wouldn't fall off. So why can't we just stop and say, okay, you know what, today we're just going to do whatever, just go out, play on a seesaw on your own with 2 meters difference. Seesaws are great because there's 2 meters between each of you, isn't there? So yes, I think it's a really good point. What are the others?
Well, yeah. There's a couple of things in the chat that a few people have raised about sort of culture and having a leave culture, and people feeling like they need permission to have some time off, and how that's going to change with the fact that we've all been kind of working remotely.
Yeah.
Emma, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I was just a bit slow to the party, but my brain was just ticking around. It's a really interesting one that I always think about when we talk about, you know, I think leaders feel that they take this weight on their shoulders, and, you know, you go, oh my God, I'm a leader. And there's an element where everybody, I know it sounds a bit weird, but everyone's the leader. It's that ownership of everyone else. And I've always been, the amount of times where I have stressed myself out massively going, right, I'm leader, I've got to come up with the answer, I've got to look after these guys, what am I going to do? And ultimately, the easiest thing to do is just have a conversation with everyone and say, okay, guys, what's everyone thinking? Because absolutely, fundamentally, every success I've ever had in my career is a direct result of someone else's idea. It's people sharing, that's the moment, that's the bit, and it's getting people talking. And so I guess I was just, my reflection on just listening to that sort of feeling a responsibility of being a leader, it's more about being a human being and just remembering that everyone's a human being, and just because one person's got a job description and a job title of saying something, it absolutely doesn't mean that they're the right person to actually help everyone. And it's that conversation. I loved Karen, before she went, one of her comments was about the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. There's all these different elements that I just think are just so important, and it's about everyone just being a human being and just creating the environments that people speak up, they talk, and all of a sudden that burden of leadership is not a burden, it's an absolute joy of just harnessing all these wonderful ideas that people have, and it's just the little things, it's always the little things that make the big differences, I always think. So yeah, that's me.
That was brilliant, Emma, thank you.
Thanks, Emma. So we're just coming up to 10 to 12. I've just shared in the chat a link to the Slido and the hashtag again, 9306. It would be great if we could do another word cloud of, you know, how people are feeling now versus 2 hours ago. And what we normally do, for those who, I think there's a couple who might not have been to one of these sessions before, is we share all of the information and all of the kind of great things that have been raised today, and a recording of the session as well. It's great for us to see that, you know, by getting together and talking like this, that we have an impact on everybody. Oops, hang on. Just going to have a look at the results. Oh, we've got reassured, inspired. We've got buzzing again. Yeah, energized. Hopeful, lots of hopeful. That's good.
That added to the first one, Louise? Or
No, I've done a second one.
Fantastic. I can only see the first one, I think, on my phone.
Okay.
So just share your second one.
Yeah. Bear with me.
I've really enjoyed spending time with you all, actually, because it has been really interesting and energizing for me. So thank you very much for that. It's really brilliant. So thank you. Ooh, Louise. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Louise. Brilliant. So thank you very much. And we haven't got a date for our next one yet, have we, guys? I don't think. But it'll be in probably about 6 weeks' time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unless you want one sooner, but 6 weeks seems about the right sort of time, doesn't it? Yeah. Fantastic. It's been really lovely spending time with you. Thank you so much. And when I knew I was coming on the call this morning, it really made me smile. And I loved talking to you and spending time with you all. So thank you so much. And I'll see you again soon. You take care.
Thanks, Deborah. Absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
very much.
Take care.
See you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.